2 hours of easy listening. Thor 1041.
Hell yeah! Now
Hey guys.
we're just starting off in a nice like chill zone, right? Everybody's kind of relaxed a little bit after that.
Think I could
You
pull off
actually,
a radio voice.
absolutely. You have the best. You have the best voice of all three of us for sure.
Damn, dude. Thanks.
You know what'd be awesome though, and I'll guarantee this will happen at some point, is that you'll be able to start a space and you can create like an AI prompt of like describing the music you want to hear for your like little intro music thing, whatever. You can just like write like I want to rap about THORChain in 128 beats per minute and in the key of C, and I want Jay-Z to be rapping it. And it'll just like generate. It'd be awesome.
I've been listening to AI Kanye songs all morning, and they're fantastic. And also, shout out to the people who say I talk too loud. It's because of the AirPods. Sorry. I'll try to talk in a normal voice, but yeah,
Dude, I
the
saw those
AI,
comments. I
yeah.
saw those comments. I didn't even know that was like a thing. Like chatting with you up here, I never really think about it, honestly. Sounds fine to me.
Same here.
All right, all right. Cool. Well, yeah, either way, it's crazy that you can literally just replace voices in like any song now. There's this one, it was a Kanye cover of Fast Car. And I was like, damn, this is just so good. And people making like their own song, you can just record a reference track, like the reference vocals, and just
Yeah.
completely replace it with an art. Like, I'm sure you guys have seen this with the like full like AI Drake and Kanye like songs or The Weekend or what. It's just absolutely insane.
I think this is a homework assignment for the audience. Go use these tools, get Chat GPT or Chad GPT rather to write a Thor Chad rap, and then feed it into all those tools. Get Kanye to rap it. Yeah,
Oh,
and the winner,
somebody's got to do that. Somebody's got to like somebody do it for reals.
dude. We could get tons of them, and then whichever one's the best will play.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Somebody please do that. And anybody whoever wins this stupid contest we just made up a second ago, we'll like flick you some small amount of root or something like that.
Hell yeah.
All right, guys. What's going
Yeah,
on in
so
THORChain world?
yeah, nothing like too crazy like in the past week. It seems to be slowing down just week by week, especially with like, just random things always just seem to pop up out of nowhere. Uh there was that TSS upgrades. We're finally on 108.3, I think it is, as the version number, which finally fixes all the TSS stuff. And yeah, anything interesting about that? I guess it's just all kind of over now for this original TSS closure. Now the churn should be starting in like less than an hour now. So back to business as usual.
Yeah, I mean, nothing really too interesting about that. It was just fixing some TSS issues, and like, there's nothing really exciting about it. Really, to be honest with you, well, actually, some of the most
Yeah.
boring technical aspects of the network, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe there's something to be said about just the like how the network upgrades and like it does seem that like yeah, like THORChain, like when there is maintenance, it is down for like longer than a sex is, and that's obviously just a function of it solving for decentralization rather than just being able to update all the nodes at once. So yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
mean that's
just
obviously
one of those trade-offs.
it's a big difference. Like generally speaking, if a project is having an issue or something like this in general, you can almost measure its decentralization by the amount of time it takes to actually get it back online. Like if you're Sex, like you said, you can just like make some changes and deploy it and like carry on. And it's the same thing with like proxy contracts in general in the Ethereum world. Like because devs can generally just like deploy shit whenever the hell they want, they can go ahead and just fix things very quickly. But for us, we have to like you know outside of the actual dev work to fix the actual thing is that's by itself oftentimes is complex and difficult, and it takes the attention of multiple devs to working together and getting into a war room to understand the intricacies of what's happening or whatever. This shit's like not simple at all. But beyond the actual like fix whatever the hell that is and finding the solution, coding it out, getting it reviewed, thorsec to review it as well, all that kind of stuff. The actual time it takes for the network to adopt it is just it just takes time because we have to get effectively almost everybody to do it, or actually literally everybody do it in some cases, and sometimes not everybody, but it depends on the thing we're actually changing. But like this takes time for every node operator to come online and pull the update, and it's just a function of decentralization.
Yeah, and you can't just ping the person saying, "Hey, yo, dude, you're not online. You need to go update," because no one knows who. Like, if a
Right.
random node hasn't updated, there's no way to know who the actual person is, or there's no direct way to contact that individual.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I know there have been concerns about like, oh, like what if there's like one or two laggards? It didn't. I wasn't watching too closely, but it didn't seem like it got stuck there for too long this time. But like, what would have happened? Like, would it have just gone on for another day until like just until they did, or like at some point can they get kicked out, or just continue without them and then they get slashed, or like is that what would have played out if they hadn't have come through?
Yeah, I mean, so I've definitely spent a lot of time thinking about this concept in the earliest days of THORChain's design and like architecture, and and we had to think about even scenarios of like an operator gets killed, but this node is still operating because the credit cards are still functioning, I guess, and paying for the node until like all that stuff happens in the meat space. But even in a scenario where an operator just dies suddenly, and like we need to be able to do upgrades, even though that guy is obviously not ever going to update his node, no matter what. And so we have mechanisms in place to even protect the network from even that scenario, where the network will churn out. I think it's configured to be 1 at the current moment, but we can configure the number to be higher if we wanted to. Every time we churn, we churn out at one node for having not a high enough version as the other node. So as soon as the network gets to a point where it says, okay, this is the new version, which is a 2/3 majority of the nodes say, okay, the new version is like 109 or something like this. That then tells the network that anybody who's running 108 is now set to be churned out on the next churn, but it'll only select one of those people that are on 108. And so eventually, it might take some time, but eventually everybody will eventually get churned out, and then the network goes from 108 to 109. And if we want to do it faster, we can do it faster just by like increasing that particular number. And if it's not about versioning, but rather some sort of TSS issue, or where we can't sign things or something like this, or whatever, like then that becomes such an issue. And the guy who doesn't update that fixes the TSS issue, for the most part, will keep on getting blamed for fucking up the TSS signing itself. And each time they get blamed, they get more slashes. And as they get more slashes, eventually they get like to the top to be churned out of the network. And once they're churned out, they're fucking out, right? So there are multiple mechanisms in play to help us with this, but we even created another mechanism on top of all that, just for like an emergency kind of pull switch. If there's something like crazy happening that nobody would have expected, or something like really extreme, the network has the ability to just boot people out of the network, right? To just basically, like, without doing a churn, and just like kicking some node, say, out of the network for some reason. And so we can just like do a vote. And so a 2/3 majority of the nodes can just kick out a specific node for, doing something. Who knows what the hell that thing might be. And they get kicked out immediately, and they're no longer part of consensus anymore. They technically still have the TSS share and a part of TSS. But I think we have it in the code. I have to go check that, like, they wouldn't get pulled into key signs or that kind of stuff. I'm not sure about that one. I have to go back to the code and double check that one. But like, we have lots of mechanisms in place to protect us from rogue individuals. It's just a question of like, how strict do we want to be as a community or as a culture, of like how fast do we want to chastise a particular node operator for not updating his node. I think we have to be careful not to be too trigger happy about that kind of stuff. Like, for one, people do sleep. I sleep, you sleep, everybody sleeps, node operators sleep. So like, if somebody hasn't updated in 6 hours or 8 hours, like, we shouldn't be, down their throats and yelling at them for being a bad node operator necessarily, because they just woke up and something's happening. We all have lives and families and, jobs and other things as well. So, but I think in general, like a 24-hour period, maybe a 48-hour period is probably good enough in my own personal 2 cents. Anything beyond that, then we can start talking about, like, having more drastic things. We've been discussing, debating in terms, like within the community itself, like around the idea of like that something like you start to get slashes or something like this after, if you haven't updated to new version and it's been more than 18 hours or something like this, then you start to get like slash or something like this, just to kind of like push people to be more on their toes about, you know, changes and such. But that's an ongoing kind of debate and conversation we can have in the community.
Yeah, related to that, this is a kind of related question that I had. Say someone makes their own like version, right? It's not an official release, and they update to 109 tomorrow, and then the official 109 comes out. Like, how does the network like reconcile which is like obviously whichever one gets a majority is like the canonical version, but like how does it reconcile between like, hey, this is the highest version, or this is the highest version, or it could be a reverting change, but you just up the version number or something. I'm sure there's like some nuances around that. I'm just curious, like, what the details are about that.
Yeah, so you can never go downward, right? You can never set your version lower. So once you set it to 109 or something, you can't set it to 108. 109 is defined by, at this time, at least at this time, is defined by the team, and it's defined by a specific, let's call it a git hash, which is a very specific way of referring to a very specific implementation of code. If, hypothetically speaking, let's just imagine that somebody else in the community that's not part of the core team releases their own version of 109, and they make a change to their node operator to pull in this new version of 109 that is not released by the team, is released by some random node operator or something like this, and then they pull in that change, assuming they don't fuck anything up entirely in that code, which that's its own topic, but like assuming they do it correctly and they don't break anything. Not that they could break the chain or the network or anything, but like break their own node more specifically. But like if they were to do that, the network wouldn't have an ability to differentiate between the networks, the OG team or the dev team's 109 and this other guy's 109 version of 109. And so when we all set to version 109, like everybody goes to 109, there's one dude that's running a different 109 than the rest of everybody else, right? And the network starts to use that version 109 because now everybody's on a 109, but that one dude releases his own personal 109 and everybody else is using this other version of 109, which eventually would cause that one dude's node to break entirely. He would get into a consensus failure because he's got something different about his 109 in terms of its behavior than like everybody else's behavior. And so that one node would break, right? We get into a consensus failure. And then the network would continue on and everything would be fine, other than that one guy just breaking his own shit. If you got into a more extreme scenario where there's two 109s, one released by the team, one released by a node operator, and now you have half the people upgrading that one and half the people upgrading the other one, well, that would cause a consensus failure, and that would halt the chain because now there's no longer a 2/3 majority agreement on what is the behavior of 109. Now there's like half over here, half over there. And so we basically can't, we're at a lock at that point. And we can't commit any new blocks. Nobody's transferring anything. Nobody's getting their rune back as validators. Nobody can get their LP positions back. Nobody can transfer rune. Like the whole thing is fucking just frozen until somebody on one side or someone on the other side comes to the other side, and then we get 2/3 majority, and then everything continues on. And that 1/3 that is using the other version, they remain in a consensus failure, they remain broken, and probably are incurring slashes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I was just wondering like how that whole thing kind of worked. Cool, thanks for the explanation.
There's a pretty fairly extreme. We haven't seen this yet. Like we've never seen anybody outside of the core team like release a version of Thor node for a lot of reasons. But like we haven't seen that yet. And not to say that it couldn't happen or that it won't happen. If it did happen, I'd actually be quite fascinated by it just to see what it was all about, what they're trying to do, blah blah blah. But it's theoretically possible. Like the core team could just say, some random node operator could release a new version of 109 and say, hey, here's 109, here's the hash, here's how to update your node to this my version of 109. And if the 2/3 majority of the network says, okay, we're going to go ahead and accept that, then guess what? We're now using that thing that they release, right? So that's, you don't even actually need the teams to release the next 109 or whatever. Anybody can theoretically do it as long as you get a 2/3 majority of the validators to agree to that particular 109, whatever the hell that is, whether it's released by us or released by somebody else, it doesn't really matter. Not actually reliant on the team to release something in order to upgrade or make some changes.
I guess the thing that comes to mind for me is like, so the nodes still need to know like what is the sort, not a, I was going to say authority. That's not the right word. Like, but they need to know like what the trusted version they should be on is, like what's the real one, or like what are they all, like who are they all looking at to be like, okay, yes, like this is the legitimate correct version to adopt.
Right. So hypothetically, like, so I would be shocked and surprised if people have just like accepted some random build for some random dude where you can't even see like what's inside of it. Do you know what I mean? That would be crazy town if that would ever happen. But because who knows what's in the build? But like generally speaking, when you have a commit hash, you can reference that commit hash and you can validate that all of this, what includes in this hash is like all of this code here, whatever this code is, which is all open source and can be validated and like by me and you and everybody else in the world. And so like it wouldn't, I mean, we should be careful, obviously, but it wouldn't be a really great way to insert some kind of like exploit of some kind, because it'd probably have to be done in clear text, have to be done in the open and with transparency in order for the nodes to actually agree to install it. Because like, why the hell would node operators agree to install some random, node that some random build that like nobody knows what the fuck's in it? Like that would be crazy town.
Yeah, that wouldn't make any sense.
No, that wouldn't make any sense. Like I could like do that. Like I could create like an Anon Twitter account right now, for example. Create KYC, tweet out to everybody like, hey, I got this new build that's going to make THORChain 1,000 times faster, or something like this, right? Some bullshit line, and then convince all the node operators to install it, even though they can't or won't validate it's working, so forth and so on. And that would just be nutty. Like that would be insane. Theoretically, it's possible, I suppose, but like that would never happen, really.
Cool. Yeah, totally get it. So yeah, the version update's finally done, and moving on forward. So yeah, I don't know what's coming up in 109. I mean, it's probably too early to talk about that, but now we can finally get back to regular business, like testing lending and getting the actual features out there rather than doing this TSS upgrade stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the team is very like, I feel like the team in general right now is just very, very thin in a sense. Like everybody's just very busy working on their own independent, thing. Whether that be lending or testing lending, or whether that be like, osmosis integrations or like integrations with other wallets, or like it's just everybody's working on something. And so it's just like it feels like there's a lot of things like in flight.
Yeah, it's just constantly that way. Just so many things just on the horizon, but just a lot of work to get to that end result. Which, like, obviously, that's what where we all want to get. But like, there's just so many things that have to be done between now and to where we need to be. Yeah, I don't think anyone's touched lending recently, just because of all the craziness around this last version. So I think that's the next priority is just continuing with the lending testing and finally shipping that.
Yeah, I think that's probably the next priority once we get like away from all these TSS and related issues and such.
Yep. Did we want to talk about what we want? There's streaming swaps, there's ADR 9, and there's the other ADRs. We kind of talked about them last week, but yeah, some conversations that have happened. Yep.
Real quick before that is like on the lending testing, there was that cool tweet a handful of days ago just showing how like the burn on StageNet was going. Like I don't know like how much activity on the lending has been going on, but it was just cool to see like, what was it, like 20% of the rune had been burned or something on StageNet.
Oh really?
Maybe it wasn't that high, but it was like a good chunk. Somebody posted like a screenshot of a dashboard.
I think I missed that.
Yeah, I think I missed
Let me
that.
see if I can. I'll try to find it in a minute here, but yeah, maybe we can move into one of those other topics. I think yeah, the streaming swap topic would be pretty cool to hear.
Yeah, streaming swaps. Let's go into streaming swaps while Chad pulls that up. Uh, yeah, I mean, this is something that like like I know we've talked about this before. Just this is a feature that would potentially, like, if this is something that ends up going forward, something that would reduce general swap fees through the network, and basically, like the functionality of it is to automatically split your swap up into multiple smaller swaps, just like it's recommended to do today. Where if you do one larger swap, you're paying more in slippage. Uh, but that's just paying for the convenience of not having to break up your swap. But the proposal here is to implement a new type of swap that would essentially allow the network to break up your swap for you and then just send the output of those broken up swaps. So you could say like, hey, I want to break this swap up into 10 swaps over the next 10,000 blocks, and it takes in your Bitcoin, and then every whatever the interval is, it just starts swapping over that period, and then at the end, when it collects everything, it finally just sends out the outbound at the end as one transaction. So it's the same. It's a similar user experience where you're just sending in one transaction, you're getting back one transaction. It would take longer because the swap is being conducted over a longer period of time rather than just being one swap. But the real win is in the UX side of things, where it would just cost significantly less. The more you break up the swap, the less it costs to do the swap. Obviously, the downside of this is less income to liquidity providers. This is something that needs to be like carefully considered. But I think the big win, especially for savers, because like obviously you need to pay a slip fee to enter and exit savers, but with something like streaming swap where you can break it up automatically, you'd be able to deposit and withdraw with very, very little slippage incurred in comparison to like what you'd actually pay today. So you can deposit much more and withdraw much more and pay much less of your principal in fees to enter and exit, which would be just a huge win overall.
Yeah, this is actually a kind of a funny idea, just because at its face value, it sounds very small, like not a big deal. Because it's like, oh, you can just, it allows you to do off chain, which you don't allows you to do on chain, which you can already do off chain, which is break up a trade into smaller trades and blah blah blah. And it sounds like it's like, oh, it's kind of nice, but whatever, and but it's actually a much more significant in terms of its value that it has for the network. It's much higher than it actually sounds at its face value. And the reason why I say that is because, like you were saying a second ago, that like, oh, you can enter and exit savers, paying very little swap fees, right? So, which is good because that means all the yield that you generate as a saver, you get to keep more of that yield for yourself, and don't give much of it back to the LPs for the swaps that are out, which is good. That's good stuff. It helps kind of foster growth for savers for that reason. Same for lending, same for order books. Like all these things would foster more growth for those kind of features, which is great. But that's actually, to me, that's not the actual value proposition of this idea. It does provide value for those things, but to me, those things are much smaller than the actual value proposition of what this thing actually does. So let me explain to you why I feel this is actually a very significant concept. And that is that this idea has the ability that we can set a minimum size of these swaps. So say you were doing like, a $10,000 trade, and you're going to do it over 10 trades. So, each one's going to be $1,000, blah, 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 right? So we can set on the network of like the minimum size that a mini swap, one of these $1,000 like mini swaps, can be on the network. So you can't just infinitesimally go to zero and make a streaming swap where you pay absolutely nothing in fees, right? And pay nothing to LPs for providing the service of providing liquidity. So there's like a lower bound to it. So it can't be like, abused to the point where it like just empties LP. Like that was my initial concern about this idea in general, was that like it would just cannibalize LPs like way too much. right? But by setting a minimum swap size for these like little mini swaps within a street swap, like it makes sure that we don't actually cannibalize our like our swaps we're getting in now in terms of the value proposition is to the network, and we allow swaps that are much bigger that wouldn't be used on the network today, that they don't use THORChain, they use Coinbase or Binance or Changely or ChangeNow or like one of these random places to facilitate their Bitcoin to ETH swaps, just because it's way too expensive on THORChain. The price execution is just way better on on a Coinbase, even though it's decentralized and KYC and a UX disaster in my opinion, and like this kind of stuff. So it allows us to actually change the economics of how we charge fees in the network to allow basically of any trade size to a large degree to be trade on THORChain, even if it's like somebody wants to do a $10 million trade, for example. It is possible to do that now on THORChain and not go make a $10 million trade with Coinbase, right? Like we can literally set with this a simple Mimir configuration where we can increase it or decrease it as we want as a community to have our fees be as expensive or as cheap as we want. And I think if once we get to the place, and this is what I'm kind of gunning for personally, and the community can debate and argue with me all they want, and we can have that conversation, is that I think once we get to the place where we have better price execution than not just like other dexes, because literally there are none right now, but to beat all of the sexes as well. Like I mean all of them. And I think with this feature, we can get to a place where we can literally say that if you want to buy or sell Bitcoin, the cheapest place to do it on the internet is on THORChain. Literally. Like literally, you could not trade Bitcoin ETH more cheaply on any other location on the fucking internet. THORChain becomes the best price execution everywhere. And that to me means that the amount of trade volume that we would see from that, I mean, right now, like centralized exchanges get like 90% of the fucking trades, right? Of like the Bitcoin trades. Like we have an opportunity here with this that theoretically we could get orders of magnitude increase in like volume passing through THORChain, massive quantities, right? And we can control very easily with just the Mimir, like how cheap you want the trades to be and how expensive you want them to be and like all that stuff. Like I think this is actually like a huge like game-changing concept for the network. It sounds so simple and so stupid, and like at its face value it is, but its implications of what it can do for the protocol and how it can serve the industry as a whole is quite gargantuan in my opinion. And we can literally just become the best place to buy and sell Bitcoin, Ether, and other assets, bar none. And that would be insane.
Yeah,
that's
and today
huge.
all this functionality is kind of possible already, right? Like it's just not automated. Like this automates the splitting of the transaction. Where this is all possible today, and you can already break up your trade and into 10 swaps and pay maybe 80% less fees on a $10,000 swap, let's say. But this just automates it and makes it so you don't have to sign 10 different transactions and just go through all the extra mental headache. Sorry, Chad.
Yeah, and it just makes it so like the user is like they don't have to make the choice to like use the decentralized thing. They're going to use the decentralized thing because it's better. It's like getting somebody to like trying to convince somebody to like eat healthy food, and they're like, oh well, it doesn't taste good or whatever. It's like if it actually tasted the best, then they would eat the healthy food anyways. And in this case, it's like if they're actually getting the best swap, then they'll use the thing that's decentralized. They'll use the thing that's has all these other benefits that they don't even have to be like consciously choosing to be using.
Go ahead. One thing that's actually really different about this, like if you were to break your trade up manually, right, and do a 10 trades, and by the way, if you break up your trade into 10 trades, you are going to pay 90% less in fees. It's just from doing 2 trades instead of 1 trade, you'll cut your fees in half, right? And so if you do 10 trades, you're cutting your fees that you're paying 90% down. But the benefit of doing it on THORChain with this concept versus doing it yourself in your own wallet or whatever is that each time you do those kind of like mini swaps, you still have to pay outbound fees and gas fees and all those things. But in THORChain's streaming swap concept, it doesn't do that on each individual mini trade. It does that on the final exit. And so it actually is providing a significant value, because now you can break your trade into 100 trades. And by the way, if you do that, you're paying 99% less fees, but you're not paying 100 gas transactions, right? 100 outbound fees, right? You're doing it just once.
Right. That's really interesting. So it's accumulating it. It's like rather than doing 10 individual swaps, you're basically like initiating 10 initial swaps, but getting one output on the end.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's a much, you'll pay a lot less in fees just on gas fees alone, which makes it more viable for huge trades and very, very tiny trades as well.
So what about on the other side? Like who is earning less because of this? Like how much does this give less fees to I mean, obviously the outbound fee part is interesting because that would be what the reserve that's kind of missing out on some of that income, right? But how much is it cutting down on like yield for LPs and savers if it's
Yeah. So
yeah.
the reserve currently makes some income from additional gas fees that are being placed. ADR 008 kind of changes that, and it makes kind of shrimp trades more viable on THORChain in a sense. And this kind of makes like whale trades more viable on THORChain. So who's losing this scenario? So that's a good question. So think of it this way. You have a scenario where you can pick one of two things: either less volume but higher fees, or more volume and lower fees, right? And now how much of each of those things depends upon that kind of minimum swap value that I was kind of mentioning earlier. We can lever that thing down, lever that thing up, however we feel as a community is a good, happy medium, or whatever we decide that means. I don't know. To be honest, I don't even know what that number is quite yet. 5 bips is what's been thrown around so far, but we're still kind of like doing some research and analysis, blah, 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 whatever. And so like the question we ask ourselves is that like, is the act of opening up THORChain to be easily accessible by large whales to make like hypothetically $1 million trades and have a lot more volume coming through the network, does that offset the current volume, the current income we currently have where we're taking like, what's the daily trade volume of THORChain today? Like $10 million, whatever the hell the number is. And whatever income we're making from that on a per day basis, is if we 10x the volume or 5x the volume or 3x the volume, and we reduced fees by half or something like this, right, overall, then it's a net positive and nobody actually loses, right? The LPs don't lose, the nodes don't lose, and the whales get the swap, which they're for a cheaper fee than they would pay on on other exchange. And so like it just depends upon how we feel the community. My assumption is that I read an article from Chainflip a little while ago, a blog post from them, and they were saying in their blog post that you can't trade 5 BDC anywhere on a decentralized way without incurring like $5,000 in fees and swap fees. And I think it wasn't even actually true at the time, but like I think it's actually close. THORChain's like 2,000 or 2,500, something like this right today. But like none of the point. Like he's right in what he's saying that like huge volumes is not really viable on just on exchanges, and he's also saying that like over 80% of the spot trading world is actually 5 BDC or greater in terms of value, right? Like we for the most part we're probably not touching those trades all that much on THORChain. Maybe some of them are breaking up into smaller trades, or maybe once in a while some whale who's very impatient wants their trade now, blah blah blah, and will pay the additional fees, which we do see that every once in a while. And so, but like by opening up to according to Chainflip's analysis, we're missing 80% of the spot volume trading. By opening up to that other 80%, the increase in volume, hypothetically should increase quite significantly. So my assumption, and I could be wrong, and people can argue with me, is that there's a huge we're only grasping a little part of the market, and there's a lot more to be grabbed. And once we have this feature, it's a lot easier to grab the feature because we can just beat everybody on price execution. And once we do that, I think the volume will naturally follow it, and by doing so, the income of the network should naturally go up. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, right now, like for talking about Bitcoin to Ether swap, which is our biggest route on pretty much everywhere, like Trust Wallet. That's the one of the most popular routes, Bitcoin to Ethereum. We're extremely competitive against like Change Now, Changely, the centralized swap services. We better price execution. You can go on any of those websites. You can go in THORSwap and test out what a swap is, and we have better execution from, I would say, probably around $500 to right around $7,000 or $8,000 in that range, and where you're getting more just from a regular THORChain trade, but this just widens that window so much. And in, what this actually does is just makes it easier for integrations, because I know I've been saying this a lot, but I'm just going to keep saying it. So like every one of these wallets that wants to integrate THORChain, a lot of them, their number one concern is just fees, and they're perfectly content with their centralized swap service and KYCing their users and saying like, oh yeah, well, whatever, this is easier. We already have the API plugged in, and they get better X here, so we're just going to keep it. But decentralized swap service that has better execution on both ends, you get that down to $100 and a million in that range where THORChain is most competitive, and then all of a sudden there's a much larger market in how many people are going to be able to swap, and then it just makes it that much easier for us to do integrations where teams are doing their due diligence on THORChain and saying, well, wow, I mean, you can get better X for pretty much every price range. It's kind of a no-brainer to integrate the swaps then. So that's the huge win, I think.
So to take your example, so if we have better price execution, comparing us to Changely and Change Now, and when we compare ourselves to those in some ways, because they're non-KYC but centralized, I don't know why that's legal or how that functions. It sounds like it shouldn't, but it does for some reason. I don't know. I don't get it. But if we're better on the up to $8,000 range, right? To use Kyle's numbers, if we make the minimum swap size a minimum of let's just call it $4,000, right? Anybody who's currently trading now couldn't really use this feature because your mini swap size would be less than 4,000, and therefore the network wouldn't take it. It wouldn't allow it, right? So you have to do one swap. You can't do it in two swaps. But all of a sudden, a 16,000 trade or a $20,000 trade or a $100,000 trade or a $500,000 trade is now cheaper on THORChain than it is on Changely, Change Now, because I think they're generally 25 or 25 basis points for the most part, depending on some things. But we now can beat them on the full gambit of just basically almost every single trade that can be done. We beat them in basically almost every single case. And the fees that we're now collecting already today are unchanged. We don't get any less fees being paid for the current swaps. We already have the network today. So if we just do that, we already just beat Changely and Change Now without having any losses to the LP's perspective or the node's perspective, right? But if we want to be more aggressive than that, when it's you know what, we can beat Changely and Change Now, they're at either 20 or 25 basis points, right? But a Coinbase or a Binance is doing 7 basis points or 10 basis points, 15 basis points, depending upon a bunch of different attributes. And so if you want to destroy Coinbase or go after Coinbase and Binance and those kind of guys and Kraken and whatnot, we can just change that little Lumiere and set it from $4,000, set it to $1,000. Just I'm not sure what the actual number would be off the top of my head. I'm just throwing out random numbers, but some smaller amount, right? And by doing so, we would now not only are we wrecking Changely and Change Now, we're way the fuck ahead of them. We're also now beating every major exchange in existence, and that we can do that just by enabling it, which to me is just quite comical. We'll just beat Coinbase, enable now.
Man, that's insane. I mean, yeah, that's just the golden ticket to getting it adopted, because obviously most people just care about the price, right? It's if they have the option, especially when talking about integrations and a lot of these integrators have THORChain as just one route, right? It's they might have multiple providers, and then they're just surfacing to the user the best price execution, and nobody really cares about the back end, or at least a lot of people don't care, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, if the price is the best, then it's just obviously going to be adopted. There's what could stand in the way of it at that point? Like nothing.
Take
Yeah.
Exodus wallet for example. Exodus have you guys made a swap on Exodus? When you do, you don't actually see your provider at all. It's completely just, hey, I have this much ether, and then they have their own estimation server where they run through a bunch of different quote endpoints and say like, all right, let's check Changely, let's check Change Now, let's check this other service, and they've dozens of them. There's many of them, and they check every single one to say, yeah, the execution is best on here, but this one takes longer than this one, and this is like the finale. There's the other kinds of guarantees that it has. They do kind of like a weighted ranking of all these different factors, and obviously, like THORChain, there's no risk for KYC or like your funds being held or anything like that, but it's that price X where we are competitive on certain number of ranges, than others we aren't. But yeah, the users of the wallets don't really care. They're just going to use whatever service is being offered to them. So, and the wallets, their primary goal is to just offer the best rates, because that's a big advertising point for the wallets to give to their users. Say, hey, we can guarantee that you are going to get the best rate on this trade. So, yeah, I definitely think we should step up and meet them where they want us. And that's really what's going to move the needle for THORChain and get us the big integrations that we need to keep going forward.
I think we heard something similar from, like, if I'm not mistaken, Paul from Edge Wallet, who sometimes here in these places, like, I think he had said some point that like the number of trades that they're sending us is not a gargantuan number, in part because they have better price execution on other locations. And so as soon as we have better price execution, I think that inherently will just create more volume, right?
Yeah, that's the exact argument. If you have the best price X, then everyone's going to you for the trade because you have the best X. So why would you not use
Right.
the one with where you get the biggest output?
Right. And I think once we get to a place where like we are the cheapest place you could buy your Bitcoin or sell your Bitcoin, I mean, like, that's just game over at that point.
So I haven't thought this through yet, but how does this play in with DexAg?
Yes. So DexAg can still work with this. The network would trade the, like, let's just call it like AVAX to ETH trade, right? Or something like this, right? It would do that with a streaming swap. And then once it's done with the streaming swap, it would send the remainder to the ETH to Uniswap or something like that. So it should be completely compatible and still work just well. And we could even, like, theoretically, we could do this with order books too, where order books is not doing everything in a single trade or swap, but order books is like kind of doing little mini swaps within limit orders. I think it's possible to do that as well.
Man, that's really interesting. So I guess like something like SwapKit with THORSwap could like quote it, figuring out like, okay, BTC to ETH gets this output of ETH with the streaming swap. Therefore, the quoted USDC out is going to be X amount, which is higher than THORChain directly, which is higher than, and also higher than regular DexAg. So it'll be like this whole thing kind of on steroids to an extent, because it's giving you like the best execution on the ETH and then the best execution on the, that's awesome. That'd be really, yeah.
So, but here's the negative though, right? This is what you're losing with this concept, right? Is you are opting to do a slower or longer trade for better price execution, right? Or rather paying less in fees, right? And so instead of doing a trade in this particular moment, say you're doing a trade every 10 blocks, 10 trades in total, that's 100 blocks, it's approximately 10 minutes of time. And with that, you're getting a 90% reduction in fees that you're paying, right? Hypothetically. And maybe the two asset you're coming from, the source asset and the target asset are, Bitcoin and ETH, let's just call it. And the price change of Bitcoin ETH shifts in that 10 minutes from, one direction to the other direction, either in your advantage or against you in either option. So you could save 90% in fees, but it may just end up being better to have executed it in a single trade and paid more in fees, because the price change of Bitcoin ETH in the next 10 minutes is enough to cause you to, like, the money that you saved in the swap fees to be lost in the change of the prices of those two assets, right? That's not the case when it comes for like assets, right? If you're trading USDC to Tether, or you're trading synthetic Bitcoin to layer one Bitcoin, or derived, asset Bitcoin to synthetic Bitcoin or something like this. Because like for like, the prices are always more or less the same to each other. You don't run that risk at all. You don't have to worry about, you kind of getting rugged from the idea of like price changes between two different and volatile assets. Here in that scenario, all the things are the same in terms of like their value, so you never have that problem. And I think in our cases, like I'm actually willing to have like two different min swap sizes, one for like non-like trades like Bitcoin to ETH, and then a very small, which like maybe that's gonna be like 4,000 number, just to throw that number out. I mean, I don't know the actual number would be, just some number. And then the like for like trades, like stable to stable, synth to layer one, or whatever that might be, to be far smaller. And by putting it far smaller, the fees you would pay on those would be like, basically close to zero, and you don't run the risk of like, price movements or whatever this is, which is what we want to accomplish for helping to grow and foster growth to savers and lending and order books. The order books from into the synth or exiting the synth, but not the actual order like itself, like going from Bitcoin to ETH on the order book. So like, I think it makes sense to me that like we have some sort of min value for like non-like for like, trades, and then we have a very tiny or almost non-existent min value for like trades, just to foster, because like for savers and for lending and for order books and this kind of stuff, like it's not really entering the synth and exiting the synth within the order book, or entering the saver or leaving the savers. That's like the value prop for the network. The network doesn't get a lot of, I mean, an extra swap or two is great, but like it's not where the value prop is for the feature. The value prop is like yield Bitcoin on your Bitcoin, limit orders on a decentralized exchange across chains, fixed 0% fixed rate interest and no liquidation loans. Like that's the value prop. It's not like extra couple swaps you get here and there. So like we just zero those swap fees out just to foster more growth in those things, so that people can get the value without paying more fees. And then with the non-like for like, we have some sort of min value of, it probably won't be $4,000. It'd probably be like something set in basis points relative to the depth of the pool. But we'll have to figure out the math of that later on.
Yeah, man, it's gonna be cool. So I think this idea was started this week. So I don't know if there's been any like official documentation on this or anything, or
there is actually. If you go,
was there? Yep.
There's a GitLab issue number 1514 if you want to dive into the depths of it. This is the current write-up. It's not the complete write-up. Things are subject to change. Even within the dev team, we're still kind of debating and arguing about certain things, whatever. But I think like when we first started talking about this thing, I was like, I wasn't really for it. I wasn't really against it because I was afraid that people would abuse it, and then where everybody would trade, like where everybody could make any trade at basically no swap fees. And then the network would have like basically no income. Because if you had no min swaps, then everybody can trade at like no swap fees, and then everybody might trade at no swap fees, except for ARB bots. Like ARB bots can't use this feature. They're trying to ARB the pool. They can't just do this over time. They have to do it immediately. And so the vast majority of trades probably wouldn't even use this, to be honest with you, because the vast majority of trades are ARB bots. But I didn't want to basically zero the income of the organic trades of the network, because that just kind of made me feel, and probably you too, a little bit uncomfortable. But once we had the idea of like the min swap size concept, that to me was the game changer that made this whole thing viable without allow us to control, how little people can pay in fees in some sense.
Yeah, but is that even really that big of a deal? Because you can just split your trades up normally like this anyway. Like you could write a bot that just automatic, that you could break up one swap into 100 different swaps and pay 99% less in fees today. And obviously that's not going to be used by like most users, but anyone that has like the capability of doing that could be doing that and paying almost nothing in fees.
Yeah, but the problem with that is, yes, you can do that on paper, right? And I've actually personally written a little script myself just to do some, like, I wanted to do a bunch of trading on THORChain, and so I wrote a little script for myself to automate some trading and reduce my fees and so forth. But like the more you break it down into more trades, and the longer it takes for you to do all those trades, and you can do it more effectively and faster on THORChain, like rather than you just like submitting transactions. It's actually a little bit more efficient for THORChain to do it for you in some ways. But like the longer you do that, right, the more price exposure you have to both assets during that kind of like transition from asset A to asset B. And so like if you're trying to go from 5 basis points being paid to like 2 basis points, like more the risk, the likelihood of you losing that 3 basis points benefit in the 30 minutes or an hour or whatever the hell the time is fairly likely. Do you know what I mean?
Right, that makes sense. But it's also the same for just the streaming swaps in general, where it's like you're not going to be able to be as accurate in the amount out that's estimated. Where you'll be able to get a fairly accurate picture of what your slip would be, but it's obviously impossible to predict the pool balance given that it's a swap that
Right.
To finish the whole swap it might take 2 hours, let's say, and it's like I don't actually know how long like something like that would take, but let's say it takes 2 hours to finish that streaming swap, and it's one of those hugely volatile days. You're already losing that like being able to go to the quote endpoint and be like, oh yeah, I know that if I swap right now, I'm going to get this much out. There's no guarantee of like I'm going to get this much out. So it's the same risk,
right?
Either way.
And that's one of the negatives of this feature. Actually, I should mention is that like right now when you make a trade on THORChain, you can specify like here I'm putting in one BTC and I want to get out X number of Ether on the other side. And if the network gets a swap and pays the outbound fees and all these things happen, and the number of outbound Ether tokens is less than the one that you would specified, then they'll just do a refund, right? So just send you back your one BTC minus a few bucks in fees. And with this feature, because you're trading over a period of time and you're committing changes to the chain and people are swapping and trading on that information and all that kind of stuff, you can't really revert a trade, right? So that's the negative here is that like it's kind of a set and forget, and whatever happens, happens. We might have ability to like cancel in the sense that like, okay, half your streaming swap has gone through, the other half has not, but things are going in a direction you just don't like for whatever reason. You send a cancel transaction, and then it just like, okay, it cancels, and it sends you the Ether that it already swapped and some of and the Bitcoin that it hadn't swapped yet, and you get both sent in both directions. So you can like, you get partial fulfillment of your trade, and because you canceled it midway through or something like this, that might be possible. But like that's one of the changes here that you can't actually determine how much Ether you're going to get in the long term, and which is kind of funny too, because like I was talking to THORChain Bull the other day about this concept of streaming swaps, and one of the things that he was saying was that like one of the most heavily utilized trading tools in the spot trading world for like big whales and people who have lots of money is what's called like a TWAP trade, right? Which is a time weighted average price trade. And so it's just like it's for people who like want to make a big motion into selling a token or buying a token, whatever direction they want to go, but they don't want to cause a huge price change in the asset itself. I guess like the liquidity might be kind of low for that particular asset, or maybe they just don't want to make a huge trade and actually push the price up or push the price down. And so they do like a time weighted average kind of thing where just like they just buy every hour or something like this for some period of time and until like their trade is executed. And so then you can do this with this feature where you can say like, okay, I want to do 10 trades, but I want to do it like, over the time span of like 24 hours. So 10 trades every, I don't know how many blocks are on a particular day on THORChain, but like wherever it is divided by 10. And then like you can like make 10 trades over 24 hours and have a TWAP kind of selling of one asset and buying of another asset, which is kind of interesting.
Brought up Crypto Sailor and R Wizard. I think R Wizard had some thoughts about this last week. Why don't we just start with him?
Hey, love the direction that this conversation is going, making DEXs more efficient. I listened to last week's recording, and I just want to make sure we're kind of here on the same page. Like in the concentrated liquidity model, you have fees and you have slippage. Every trade, you're still getting like, let's say it's a 0.2% fee, right? So if you're trading $100 of asset A, you're getting $99.8 back of asset B. So the slippage is getting close to zero, but that 0.2% fee is still going to LPs. Whereas in like a case where you don't have concentrated liquidity, instead of getting 99.8, you're getting 90, like that. So the concentrated liquidity model solves that slippage issue of not getting as much of asset B back. Um, so I'm kind of curious to know, like, why are LPs actually losing here? Like, why is that fee going down? I think what the goal here is to reduce slippage, not necessarily reduce the fee. Am I correct in saying that? Are we on the same page?
Technically, actually, both is happening here, right? So, um, for me, um, what matters is price execution, right? And that is comprised of swap fees and slippage and all the like and other attributes as well. But those are probably the most predominant things. And with this concept, both are happening, right? So one of the ways to reduce slippage, which is what concentrated liquidity is kind of designated to do or designed to do, is to break up your trade into smaller trades because each individual trade will not push the ratio between those two assets very significantly. Where if you did a one big trade, it would push the ratio a lot, causing more slippage in the pool, meaning that the next guy who jumps in, has a different ratio than the previous guy, and so therefore it gets a different price execution because the ratio is different, right? And so, and usually you want to, wait for arbitrage bots to kind of push the ratio back to where it is and blah blah, or potentially LPs or whatever. But like, that's part of here is that we do get much more capital efficient just by allowing this to happen on the network directly, making it very easy, and allowing people to break up the trades into small trades. You just naturally will get less slippage from that.
Yeah. Okay. Um, it's an interesting solution. I would definitely have to think about it a lot more. I think, like you've already kind of mentioned, the downside is it takes longer. Um, if let's say you implement concentrated liquidity instead, right? What you get is you get your price. You already know what your price is. You get that price right away. That's one big advantage. And the second big advantage is you get it is the time advantage. You don't have to wait. Whereas, like, you might have to wait for some other guy out there who's on the other side of the trade who wants to take that same trade. Or you could implement something that says, like, if the price moves against me by so much, don't execute the trade. Just wait a little bit longer until the price comes back. Something like this. There's like a time disadvantage, a huge time disadvantage. Why not just go the concentrated liquidity model way and say, you know what, we can still get that flat 0.2% fee on every trade, reduce the slippage. And by the way, that fee is competitive with sexes anyways, because on a sex, you're paying a flat fee on every trade. Um, why not do that? Like, why not go that direction?
Yeah, so concentrated liquidity, I don't know how that would work in the context of like some of the aspects of the network. For example, like savers, right? Savers is a kind of a weird kind of beast. We're the first ones that do that. And to me, that's a very significant contribution to the space. Being able to learn BDC and your BDC is nothing to scoff at. In a decentralized way, we're the first and the only ones to do that, and we'll probably be the only ones to do it other than our forks for years to come. I think we're kind of ahead of that. I don't know how concentrated liquidity within the context of savers would work, right? But like, if the goal here is to get better price execution, get better slippage, more capital efficiency, there's lots of ways to do that, right? The stream softness is one way to accomplish that. Order books itself is another way of accomplishing that. Queued liquidity, which is another concept we penned up like a year and a half ago, but never actually implemented. Another way of accomplishing the same idea as concentrated liquidity, gives you that capital efficiency. So there's lots of ways to accomplish the task or the goal of what you're trying to accomplish. And concentrated liquidity is just one of those mechanisms to do so. And I don't think it's the right solution for this particular project. But I think it makes sense in other projects. Maybe it makes sense in like Chainflip's case. I think it's a terrible idea in Uniswap's case. I think they get fucked all the time. But like by that system. But like, it works for different projects.
Yeah, it's an interesting solution. Yeah, I mean, like, I think one thing I like about THORChain right now is like small swaps can still be used, right? You don't alienate the small players, which I think is like 100% in alignment with crypto fundamentals and first basics is you don't want like now to eliminate that. You still get fees that accrue to LPs, like, LPs don't get fucked. And it seems like a very complex solution, but I guess maybe this is like resulting from my lack of understanding of a slip-based fee. And
Yeah, slip-based
understand.
fees is actually like a really like, and that's another one of our innovations. And I actually sent out a tweet this morning about it, where like I saw this article from Unchained about this one med dude, this one med bot, earn $1 million from sandwich attacks in a single day, which is fucking nuts. And because of the slip-based fee model, along with the swap queue system that we've designed and implemented, sandwich attacks are literally impossible on the network. There's no traders aren't getting fucked over. To think that like traders on your decks are getting rugged out of $1 million a day or the fuck the number is now is insane to me. I mean, that's just like an open known exploit that's being exploited all the time and like nobody cares. I just don't
Yeah.
understand that. I just don't I don't know why people are like cool with it, because
You
it's
know,
definitely not cool.
this might be a bit of a hot take, but MEV, like if I'm trading $100 of asset A to get $99 of asset B versus $90 of asset B, I'm okay with that guy taking, a little bit or, just smooching a little bit off that trade if it means better price execution for me. So like it may not be the worst thing in the world to like, for those that necessary evil to exist as long as I'm getting a better price anyways.
But aren't you getting a lesser price inherently if somebody's taking from you? I mean, you
Not if
don't
it
really
means the slippage is reduced by more. If the slippage is less, then I'm happy to give up a little bit.
but you don't care about that, right? All you care about is I'm giving you, X tokens is the source thing, and I want Y. I want the maximum number of Y on the way out of it. You don't really
Exactly.
care anything other than that. I'm putting in X and I want to get Y, right? I want the maximum number of Y, whatever the fuck that is. And if somebody is fucking your trade and the process of that, and instead of getting Y, you're getting Y minus 20, whatever the hell the number is, you're getting fucked. Like there's no other way to talk about it. You are
Yeah, but
literally
if the
getting fucked.
slippage is plus 40, I'm getting Y minus 20 plus 40, right? So if that guy is
Not,
taking 20 because I
but
can get an additional 40
not in
because
a
the
sandwich
slippage is
attack.
reduced.
Yeah,
Okay.
not in a sandwich
Okay.
attack. In a sandwich
Okay.
attack, you're just getting fucked, right? You're talking about in a concentrated liquidity scenario, or like a way of using MEV to front run a trade or something like this,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
That's a little bit different than a sandwich attack. A sandwich
I
attack is
see.
just like attacking a particular user and fucking them over. That's fucked up. In general, like I don't think MEV in general. People talk about good MEV and bad MEV, and like I've never quite understood. Like, yeah, I guess you could. To me, is a fairly weak argument about good MEV, but it's not a bad argument like that. Just like, okay. I mean, even in our traditional finance system, it's illegal, and you would get investigated by the SEC if you were front running shit. I mean, everybody kind of does it anyway, and even like Coinbase probably run all your trades, and Binance probably does it too, and like it's just kind of a thing that happens when you have information, about what's about to happen. People will find a way to take advantage of that information, but like I think from our perspective, the way we've designed THORChain is just to create the most egalitarian system, the most equal system, where everybody's treated the same, and that no individuals can fuck around with another individual, right? And their individual trades or swaps or whatever it is. So you can't do sandwich attacks on THORChain. I'm quite happy that that's the case.
Yeah.
But even on THORChain, like if you want to get best price execution, right? You want to get like to make sure the pool price is correct. The pool price is equal to the market price. Like that's what you're talking about in some ways of like, oh, I see a trade coming through. I can blah blah blah. Like the pool is a little bit off or whatever. I can whatever. Like you can do that with THORChain's synthetics in a single block, right? Which is totally possible and even practical, and probably does happen quite frequently. I think we can probably get better in that way. Or we probably don't. Arbs probably don't arb as efficiently as they could. There's probably more room to be made and more improvements to be made there. I mean, we can build some tooling to help that, but In the end, all you care about is you put an X and you get a Y. You want to get as much Y as possible, and sandwich text will always give you less Y.
Yeah. I guess just closing thoughts here. Like I love the premise of THORChain cross-chain swaps. It's a novel idea. Hate to see it lose to other systems that are more centralized and that provide better slippage. So I love the direction that like THORChain is going in. Yeah, just my only concerns are like the time-based idea of trading. Um, is that going to discourage people? Is it not? Like, we don't really know. Um, yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me back.
yeah. Thanks, Wizard. The one thing about the time concept is that like how much time is defined by effectively the depth of the pool, right? So if the pool is double the size, in theory, you have half the time to make the trade, I guess, in some sense, to have the same result, right? In terms of like fees paid, that kind of stuff. So, like we can give you better price execution with this idea of this streaming swap concept, in theory, and then as THORChain continues to grow, and lending launches, and it causes a bunch of buying and burning of room, which causes room price to go, which causes the TVL to go, which causes the bond to go up. Like all these things can happen, and the pools get deeper. Even if we do absolutely fucking nothing, we just sat in our hands and did jack shit. The TVL will naturally increase just from bull market conditions, right? Just by on its own, without us even lifting a finger. So like as we get deeper and deeper pools and that kind of stuff, which I think is a natural thing to happen with time, and not to mention the additional advantages of like launching this feature, the streaming and swap feature, or lending, or these other things as well, savers, all benefit to that stuff. Will just make the time aspect tighter if you choose it to be tighter. But not everybody wants a tight time frame. They want something actually quite longer, and they want to have a large trade over a long period of time because that suits their intentions.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do a deep dive over this slip-based fee to kind of understand why concentrated liquidity isn't possible, especially if it's not compatible with some of the other features. And I'll be back on with more questions.
Yeah, please. I think it is compatible with the slip-based fee model. I think that still works. I think what's incompatible, or at least I haven't spent that much time thinking about either, to be honest with you. But I don't know how that would work within the savers concept, to be honest. But I have to think more about it.
Let's give Crypto Sailor a minute here. Hey.
Hey guys, how you doing? I hope everybody's doing all right. I just wanted to didn't have much questions. Our wizard like asked everything I would have asked and more. But I also wanted to come at it, like, obviously I just wanted to kind of pop my head in here about something that I'm working on also that I think is slightly related, which is of course a way to hopefully add to increasing of depth of pools, etc., which is also adding to, of course, market efficiencies, etc. I don't really know if how much anybody would want to go into that, but I've been working on a way of adding some security to the vaults during scaling of the network. So I'm hoping that this could be a way by which, increasing trust in the market in the security protocol would encourage, let's say, people with larger amounts of value to add to the network. Anybody wants interested in learning more about it, obviously there's a tweet that's pinned on my profile. So it's a really interesting way that I think is leveraging that something super unique and important about THORChain that isn't talked a lot about, which is this whole non-deterministic validator set. So that's really like the key to everything. I don't know if there's many other or any other real proof of stake project that has the same kind of dynamic validator set. And that's really the only way that you can get enough like a trusted entropy into the system to be able to do any kind of non-determinism in the state machine. So it's a unique opportunity to maybe exploit one of the really important, what I think are, kind of like a holy grail achievement in proof of stake. So that's just kind of the angle that I'm taking of it. Obviously, increasing the depth of the pools is like always going to like increase the efficiency. So just wanted to let everybody kind of up to speed on that and check it out.
Is this the
Yeah, I
same
know
thing
you
we were
posted
talking
that
about?
old video. Yeah, it's that it was that whole video. It was like it was quite long, so I don't think anyone's really gotten a chance to like fully digest it yet. But I believe this was adding some extra. Well, it's adding non-determinism for the churns where it more. I don't know how to exactly say this, but it
Yeah,
randomizes which members of the Asgards are in which vaults in a more random way, I believe, rather than just doing a straight ordered list.
correct. Yeah, the whole idea is to eliminate the simplest of attack vectors, which is to say, okay, like the vaults are economically secure, but let's like think in like maybe edge cases. So, like even like Doctor Evil doesn't care. He just doesn't care about losing his bond. He just really hates Chad, so he's gonna like take the vaults just to like besmirch him. So like there are ways that they're like a really kind of low level or a low barrier to entry if you have like the means and the uh, out of band and downline ROI to justify taking the vaults. So this is a way of taking away the ability to just simply align your colluding nodes into any vault you want and reduce it to, like as you say, pure randomness, and to try and like increase that entropy as maximum as possible. Well, at the same time, like importantly, you don't want to be able to be manipulatable, because the protocol can, become disrupted by people who would want to do this, and in the manipulation of the entropy creates some kind of disruption in the network. So it's a kind of a tricky balancing act that you want to take into account when you're doing this. Obviously, you don't want any kind of brute forcing scenarios. You don't want to have like block proposers sitting there for like maximizing their time window to try and like figure out the best scheme. So it was a little bit tricky, but yeah, it does create some randomness in the assignment of the the validators to the particular Asgard mold. So I think that is something that I think what really is kind of like also going to maybe help with the scaling, because I could see certain scenarios where people with large sums of money might see that these attack vectors are, edge cases, but maybe viable. So it could encourage people with, like I say, like larger stacks to maybe jump on board.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I have talked about this issue a few times in previous weeks, months, whatever it's been. To me, it doesn't sound like an improvement from my perspective, just because I think I can't remember all my points. I gave this more thought months ago, and I kind of forget some of my points. But like that injecting randomness into the selection of which nodes are in which Asgard, on the surface level sounds like a good idea. And I understand why people think it sounds good on the surface level, but it's much more complicated than that, right? For one, you can't actually have randomness. It's impossible to have randomness in a blockchain, to my knowledge, right? Especially this,
No, no,
because
no.
you all.
This is the key point, because THORChain allows for this. Like, this is what I would like to kind of like get into a bit, because this is like completely unique, and I feel it's like not unpacked enough. Like, in my perspective, having been a part of blockchain space for 10 years, what THORChain did is massive. It's absolutely massive, because you not only have like a Byzantine fault consensus like layer, but you have like a competitive performance based and bond based mechanism by which you're like completely, in a way, you're randomizing the validator set all the time. So the validator set itself is a source of like, it captures the non-determinism of the network itself, because you can't guarantee the performance of any node on the network over any period of time. So the validator set has entropy in it that is secure.
Yeah, but to me, it would be very hard to capture one of these Asgards because of that bonding competition on the inbound, right? So in order to capture an Asgard, you have to have 13 out of the 20, or I assume it's 20. I'm not sure the actual numbers right now. Maybe it's 18 or something like this, but like whatever,
16.
Whatever the quantity is, right? If it's 16, then let's figure it's like whatever the hell the number is, 10 or whatever the hell the number is. And so you need to get 10 validators in one particular Asgard. Now, to achieve that goal, you need to have those 10 Asgards bonded with very specific amounts of varying degrees, right? One high, one low, and one medium, like across the spectrum of all those 10, in a sense, right? So you can't just like bond 10 validators with 10 huge bonds and get them churned in. If you do that, you wouldn't be in the same Asgard. It'd be kind of a problem, right? And so because it spreads out lows and highs within a given Asgard, to capture 10 within a single, you'd have to get a very wide range of bond sizes. And by doing that, well, your high bond nodes will churn in, rather quickly, but the low ones will have a hard time getting in, right? Because they're competing with other guys who are trying to churn who are higher than you, right? And even if you were to do that, we're not relying on that concept to be able to protect the network. It's still economically infeasible to attack the network, even if you were to accomplish that. Like you're not actually protecting against anything other than like somebody just wants to buy up, $20-30 million worth of rune just to burn the world down and put their own pockets to zero. I mean, like that would be, kind of crazy. If that's the scenario that we're concerned about, then like, that's.
Well, I do think like there's like certain like there is scenarios like I really think it's important to consider, and obviously considering security, like hostility from all different potential vectors. You can't just like assume that there's a vector and there won't be hostile people.
Okay, but if they're hostile in a way that is destroying themselves, right? Like if you compare that to something like osmosis, for example, right, where you can go ahead and bond up and you can take all the money and you can run away with it and probably make a profit at that scenario, like they have twice the TVL that we do. If your opinion is that if we change it so that it's harder for an actor to kill himself on the network rather than it being easier to do it, although I would still argue it's not easy, or even practical, I might even argue. But if that's the argument, then osmosis already has twice the TVL than we do. I don't think that would actually cause more TVL. I think that notion is probably, to me, completely like ludicrous. Like maybe not ludicrous is the wrong word, but I think
I would just put it this way.
That's a huge jump to be made.
I would put it this way, right? So if there's any way, let's say a multinational, I think the wrong assumption is to think that there aren't disrupted incumbents who don't like blockchain, who don't like DeFi, who in fact might hate us and may hate you just for doing this, like Warren Buffett or something. So for anybody right now to lose like $5 to $10 million in taking the vaults and then exploiting that to do a smear campaign across all of media because another DeFi DEX blew up, and then that's another reason why we should use CBDC. There's way to justify ROI, like I said, out of banded down lines.
Right. Okay. So let's assume you're correct in that Warren Buffett hates me for some reason. I think he loves me, but maybe he hates me. Right.
He's mentioned you on many occasions, so I wouldn't be surprised.
He talks to me about me all the time. No, of course, that's not true. But I still think that it's actually more secure to do it, and it's harder to capture an Asgard in its current mechanism with its deterministic methodology than it is to insert randomness, to be honest. Because the randomness, you will inevitably eventually get there. It's randomness. So at some point, you're going to fucking hit it. You don't got to do anything. You just got to have some nodes. The only requirement is to have nodes. That's the only fucking requirement. And eventually, you will actually get there. Now, I completely disagree that it's actually impossible to have randomness, because the only way you can have randomness is that you insert some kind of random concept into the protocol. But the only way you can insert anything into the protocol is through a validator. And if a validator is then putting the randomness into the system by some way, stretch, or form, which they have full control to do so, then they will insert whatever randomness they want that is in their own best interest. So if I have 10 validators, right, say the randomness is the last hash of the last commit, the last block, right? That's a somewhat random. It's a huge 64 character randomly generated, blah, 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 whatever, right? It's not actually random. Nothing in a blockchain is ever actually like there literally is no fucking random. The whole thing would break.
There is. There is.
No, it would break.
Yeah.
You can't have randomness. How do you have randomness in a blockchain?
Yes. There is no way. There is no way to perfectly predict the performance of any node in the network over any long period of time. Like validators are earning slash points and earning rewards, and the variance of that is affected by the performance of the network. So you cannot exactly predict what anybody's.
I can predict it.
What's that?
If you're a validator right now, and for whatever reason I want you to have more slash points, I can give it to you. I can DOS your node, for example. I can take your TSS, signing ability offline temporarily
No,
and
no, no.
cause
Yeah,
more
that's
splash
fine.
points for you.
That's
Okay,
fine. But the point is, you
but
can't
I'm
control the
manipulating your outcome
entirety.
that you want. I
Yeah,
can
but you
manipulate.
can't control the entirety of the network, right? So you can't control every single node state or the whole history of every single
No,
node
actually,
on the network.
You do control every single node network. You literally, that's what a blockchain, like everybody has identical state. There's nobody who has different state from
Yeah, of
anybody else.
course. But any change in like the either the performance rating or the bond of the validators that exist in the consensus of the state machine as the validator set, you can only affect the nodes that you control and or other nodes that you would like to control, and you do not control the entirety of the network.
All right, so I've already shot in like at least 4 or 5 reasons why we're down an even more extreme rabbit hole. But I'll let you take me even further down this rabbit hole, right? So explain to me, if you were going to have insert randomness into selection in terms of what node is in which ANSGard, where is the source of randomness? Where are you getting it from?
Right. So there's three, let's say three general primary sources of entropy that are available to us. Obviously, we know the block hash is not significant, but the block time is also not fully manipulatable by any significant cohort in the consensus beyond a certain range. Also, of course, we have the state of all the data that's available to the state machine based on the validator set. So the thing is,
this one at a time.
No, hold on. Look,
okay.
I've taken a much more sophisticated approach than I think you're giving me credit for. So the idea is that you create a balance of entropy, right? So you create sources of entropy that are, yes, manipulatable, yes, validators in order to game the system, which apparently will never happen because it's already secure. But in the analysis of the exploitation of this method, you're inherently saying that there's an incentive to do this, but the existing method doesn't even prevent that. So by creating balance of entropy,
that your sources of empathy are not sources of empathy because it's manipulatable. I can manipulate.
Yeah, of course it's manipulatable, of course, but that's not the point. The
then
point
it's not
is
random, is it? It's not random then. If I can manipulate the outcome, it's not random.
If you're talking about pure randomness, but in any computing system, it's nothing really random, anyways. It's like a theoretical.
That's my point. You can't insert randomness, especially into a blockchain, because the only
but we can
themselves.
have a non-deterministic state that we can exploit. So if we take there is no way for any cohort to significantly manipulate either the block time to its specific target or either the entirety of the state of the validator set. Now, also not only that,
I can do that though. I can easily do that, right? If there's a block time that does not,
one person on the network, you have one node on the network, you're going to do that. So you have centralized control of the network.
First of all, I have 10. According to you, I have 10 nodes that I'm trying to manipulate to be in a particular asset, so I can attack it only to lose money, right? And this is a fucking nutty situation. But okay, let's go down the hole.
I'm telling you, it's not a nutty situation, man. Why would you think that there are entities in the world who have trillions of dollars, who would very much like to besmirch blockchain? It's a complete false notion that somehow the blockchain industry exists in some kind of benign environment. It exists in a fully hostile environment, and it's not proper security approach to consider that's not the case.
Okay, the idea of self-interested individuals is how any blockchain works, whether we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about Ethereum, we're talking about THORChain. They all require this concept, right? It creates incentives so that people operate in the best interest of the network. And the idea of somebody going in there to just for example, I could attack Ethereum right now and burn with just nonsense Ethereum transactions that do absolutely fucking nothing. And I just a huge amount of Ethereum gas fees to do so. And I just block anybody else from being able to trade on Uniswap.
Right. But what's the cost, right? When the cost on the THORChain network is just like 15 million. Right, the cost right now on the THORChain network is what? To get into the vaults, it's 15 million. Write a script, put your bonds in the right order. You're in the vaults on the first churn.
No, you're not. That's not how that. That's not how. No.
Yes.
It would take months to get to that place, even if you wanted to get to that place. You know that? Like, it would take so fucking long. It would take you almost like, what, 9 fucking months? Even if you were right, even if you're correct with your saying, which you're actually not, but even if you were correct, it would still take you 9 fucking months to get there, minimum. Just because
With 10 nodes, it does not take 9 months to get on.
you
Like,
have
what
to
I
get
mean,
churned out. And you're not going to get
yes,
your
of
node
course.
that's like 300 room to be churned into the network. So it would take you, like, it's just not going to happen. Do you know what I mean?
Why? Well, I mean, there are people that I'm talking to that think this is an issue with the network. So, I mean, obviously, this becomes a moot point as the network scales. But I think there is big money on the
But
sidelines looking at this protocol
you have to
that is a little
acknowledge
hesitant.
that you have to acknowledge that the thing that you're proposing here, right, of trying to create this empathy for selecting things, is not going to increase security, because the only requirement to attack the network in the way you're talking about is just to have 10 nodes and then wait. If you have 11 nodes, even better. If you got 12, wait even less.
Correct.
Right?
So
That's all you got to do.
it increases dramatically both the time and the economic cost of attacking the network. I'm not saying that the economics isn't secure within its like locality. Like, yes, when a large network gets really big and it costs like $500 million to take over the network, then you can consider it secure in the economic context, like in the global world. I'm just saying from the perspective now, it's like THORChain is not as secure in the vault as it could be. Maybe that's a reason why big money people who know that there are people who are nefarious, who are looking at this and maybe thinking, maybe it's not something I want to jump into yet.
Well, to be fair, I would also agree with Chad that I think the reason people aren't LPing is not because of the possible theoretical scenario of someone being able to manipulate the vault order. It's like that is, I think that's way too like high level to talk about, like, oh yeah, LPs aren't LPing because of this. Like there's a whole host of reasons, and I think that's speculation on your part, where it's definitely not clear that there is a large number of capital on the sideline specifically because of that one issue. Not to diminish your issue or whatever.
No,
but I
no,
think
no.
we're spending a little too much time on this whole subject.
Yeah. I'm not disparaging anything that Chad is very accurate in a lot of his critiques. I'm trying to say, like, is there a way to very simply do this? And like, is this like a potentially big deal to a certain segment of the potential market that would use THORChain? And I think it's important to realize that there's a reason why THORChain is in Trust Wallet, right? Like, no rinky-dink little DeFi startup gets into Trust Wallet, right? So there are big players in this space, including CZ Binance, who know all about Trust Wallet or know all about THORChain. So I think what's going on is the world is kind of looking at THORChain and seeing what's going to happen with it and how it's going to become maybe a big player, because in a lot of ways, the primary use case for THORChain isn't really trading and stuff like this. It's going to be for large, major, like self-sovereign organizations who want to use the protocol for the same benefits everybody here does, which is full self-custody swaps. That's perfect for nation states.
Let me put it
so that's the concept, right? I'm just thinking on a much bigger level.
Let me put it this way, and then we can talk more or move on or whatever. But like,
that's fine. No, I've made my point. I think I just wanted to make my point. I could be wrong. Like, I'm not like trying to say I have like any kind of like magic sauce here. It's just a concept that I'm like, just really thinking about how to like contribute to the overall like health of the protocol. So thanks for your time, Chad. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing it up too. But let me just break it down in a different way, just so you and the greater audience can understand the difference of opinions here and why I feel the way you feel and maybe whatever you feel. The mode of attack, assuming somebody has enough room to get the enough nodes to run and simple attack on Asgard and lose a bunch of money to do so. But like, assuming that all happens, in the current model, what protects the network from somebody doing that and acquiring all the nodes there in a specific Asgard is that they have to bond up on a wide range of bonds, high and also low. The low ones are hard to get in because they're low bonds, obviously, right? And so the idea that you can get all 10 in, while mathematically as certainly as possible, it is quite difficult and requires a lot of churns, blah, 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 all these things, right? And what you're proposing is, instead of the bonds having any relation to this whatsoever, you're talking about It should just be through these modes of these inputs of randomness. And that you mentioned timestamps of blocks, and you mentioned the app hash of the last commit or whatever it is, and we can talk about all of those things, and all those things can be pushed in NICBA. Even like the timestamp, like I'm a part of the signing was created the next block. I don't like this time right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and delay it another second and a half or whatever the fuck it is. Like I can easily push things out further at will in order to cause us to not create a block at a time period that is not even time's hard because it's like there's no sense of time within blockchain, so I don't even know how that would necessarily work. But like everything is just like I can just have my 10 nodes or whatever nodes I have in the network now, just constantly be pushing the time or pushing the app hash or pushing this or pushing that, whatever it is, to eventually create an outcome that mathematically is my best interest, which I can just arbitrarily do anytime and as often as I want with as many nodes as I want and attack as many times as I want. With the other system, I have to wait. I have to just I can't manipulate the outcome in the way that I want. I have to just sit there forever until I get there, right? And there's nothing you can really do to speed it up. But what you're suggesting, it gives people an ability to speed it up, right? Like, and even if you don't speed
No,
it
it
up,
doesn't
eventually
speed it
you'll
up.
get it
It
anyway.
increases the duration of time. Like if you don't adding this shuffle method doesn't increase your ability to get into the validator set. It's like there is no reduction of anything. It's in addition to.
If you're picking the value, and there's a whole other series. Like I didn't even get to other things, but like if you're picking the validator set based on randomness, and you want a certain input, like some number is going to be put into some. Let's just call the number 72. That's the starting point of random. Like whenever you talk about randomness in computers, it never is actually a random. It always starts from some integer. It's actually mathematically how it works in an actual computer, right? So like you have to boil it down to some integer, and then that becomes your point of randomness. That's just your starting point, your launching point of randomness from that particular integer, right? That's why if you do ask for randomness like at number 72, you always get the next result is 472. The next one after that is 1024. The next one, it's not like it's actually predictable a billion times into the future if you know the starting point. So you're looking for a specific.
Well, I think there's other aspects to it. I don't want to I think we could leave this because it's going to go on for a while. Like I would probably just keep countering you and getting deeper into the method. But I just whatever. Like you know who we are. Like we're nerds getting off here. So if everybody feel free to check my video. I'm happy to have feedback. Just trying to make a contribution.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yep. Thanks, man. Yeah, it definitely doesn't go unnoticed, and it's just not on the high priority list, but it'll definitely be taken a look at eventually, more deeply. It's just obviously a lot of other things like lending and things we got to get out there before we talk about like this type of thing. But thanks for participating. Anything else we want to talk about? There's ADR 009, but I don't know if we really want to get into it like an hour and a half in or anything like that. Do you want to get into that, Chad, or it might be too much to discuss?
We can if you want to. It's an interesting idea. I honestly don't even know how I feel. It actually was my idea, to be honest with you, but I actually don't know how I feel about it. Like I'm not necessarily I kind of like it and I kind of hate it at the same time. So I'm kind of in a mixed position.
Yeah. So, all right, let's kind of go into it because I do kind of want to talk about some of the pros and cons because I also feel like kind of mixed about it where it seems like it could work, but it also seems like I don't know, it's strange. So ADR 009 is the most recent ADR, which came up this week. And this comes off of ADR 8, where it basically takes away a source of income for the reserve. And the ADR 8 is meant to fix the gas fees, overpaying for gas fees to make it more one-to-one. And ADR 9 is basically the proposal to fix the reserve income, which would be taken away by 008. So ADR 9 is, it does quite a lot of things. It's quite complicated. And I think, let me just go through some of the stuff here. So the goals of ADR 9 is to overhaul the fee price denomination. Okay. revamp fees to source 500,000 of annual income to make up for ADR 008, and then overhaul the role of the reserve in fees. So the way it accomplishes this is essentially stops, and Chad, correct me if I'm wrong on this because I only really read this like once or twice, but it effectively stops paying LPs and savers directly, and instead funnels all of those funds back to the reserve and bumps up block rewards to make up for the difference in the actual yield that is given to LPs and savers. And the end result of this is basically all yield is given to LPs and savers through block rewards only. And any kind of income direct goes to the reserve, which is what funds the block rewards. So yeah, it seems like it's a complete total dynamic shift, which is why like I think a lot more like thought, research, and discussion needs to go into this, and probably like a full vote to get if this were to go through, because it's complete change of like how things work today. But I'm curious to what you think are like the good parts of this and the bad parts. Like think about the good parts. The yield will be much more steady for all actors, so like it'll be much more predictable. But at the same time, it like I don't know. Tell me what you think about this, Chad, and where you think the wins are and where you think where the shortcomings are.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, all right, so in ADR 008, we're reducing the gas fees that swappers pay so that they have better price execution, to what we were kind of saying with our wizard earlier about putting an X and get as much Y out as you can. The gas fee, being a 3X gas fee in its current implementation, takes out reduces Y by some number for that purpose. And so that what that hurts in a sense is it hurts the shrimps, right? Not so much the whales, because they probably don't really give a shit, but the shrimps, the smaller trades, kind of get So when you were talking earlier about not being competitive on the change now, blah blah, and 500 is our minimum, or some number, what the hell the number is. Like that's largely the reason why it's 500 and not 100 is because of those fees, or those 3X gas fees. And so by removing those gas fees and people just paying 1 to 1 or 1.5 to 1 more accurately, and that's a whole different topic. But like by doing that, so you're making swaps cheaper and you're having better trade execution, which is great. But now we basically lost the major income for the reserve. And so this idea, in some ways, says that, okay, what's going to pay for the reserve is not necessarily the swappers themselves, because they're going to pay the same swap fees either direction, like either way. It doesn't really matter if this is enabled or not enabled. They're still going to pay $10 in swap fees. And instead, it's really the LPs or the nodes that are going to be paying for the reserve rather than the swappers, right? And so if the argument that a person can make is that, like, well, maybe the first class citizen of the network really shouldn't be LPs or nodes in a sense, but it should be the ones that are bringing in income from the outside, right? Which is the swappers. Like they're the ones that are actually we're providing the value, the service to. They're the ones getting the value out of this thing more than anyone else in some sense, arguably. And they're the ones providing like income into the network and injecting revenue and injecting organic income and real yields. They're the ones that bring in the real yield of the network, right? And so if you want to prioritize that and say, hey, you want to capture more shrimps, we want more people to do that, let's not charge them additional fees and kind of push the shrimps out in the interest of topping up the reserve and make sure the reserve has an income, and we don't get into a place where the reserve goes to zero, because we don't want the reserve to go to zero. That would not be good for the network. We got to pay things with it. And we don't want to mint Rune. Rune could go the reserve could go to zero, and that's fine as long as we just start minting Rune, which is what every other Cosmos project does, and just have an infinite supply of whatever Cosmos token we're talking about, which is not the approach that I personally like. And so that's kind of the argument here, right? So swappers stop paying for the reserve; they get better price execution. Shrimps are, swaps are better, more viable for shrimps in a sense because of this change. And now LPs and nodes in effect are really actually paying for the reserve in a matter of speaking. And we can tweak that up and down, like we can increase the emission curve or decrease the emission curve to to like, to kind of tilter more yield for LPs and less yield for the reserve, or vice versa. That's another kind of like lever we can pull as a community to kind of decide what's fair or what's good. That's kind of in a nutshell, right? So, but here's like kind of the biggest negative that I think about when I think about this feature, is that the yield of any DEX for the most part today is directly correlational to its trade volume and generally like macro conditions, right? So in bull markets, everybody's elated, everybody has euphoria, everybody thinks crypto is the best thing in the world. People are buying metals left and right. They're trying to day trade. They're trying to get ahead of the curve, blah, blah, blah. Like all this kind of crazy hysteria happening, everybody trading and buying, blah, 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 blah. And so there's lots of trade happening, and the yield goes high, to 30% yields, or how the quantity is going to be, whatever. And so you kind of ride that. In this design, that wouldn't be so true, right? In this design, it's more consistent yield, like it's kind of pumping out at a relatively consistent rate. Everybody's getting, yield pretty stably, and which is great in a bear market, because in the bear market, that other model kind of makes very little yield in the general sense of it, in terms of like general DeFi. And in the bull market, the yield of any DeFi project is generally much higher because of a lot more activity and things people are talking and tweeting and such. And so you have much more, volatility in terms of the yield of being an LP. But this kind of says, you know what, screw the volatility. Let's just kind of average it over time. So it's more like a smooth, income for LPs, rather than like thing that pumps up and pumps down and pumps up and pumps down. And that could be problematic in a sense of like, when we get to a bull market, everybody's excited about crypto again. Everybody's talking crypto. Oh, what's the highest yield? Well, it's not going to be fucking THORChain. It's going to be, this other DEX over here. Let's talk it like, crypto's DEX, the guy on stage with us here. And people might flock to him because he's got the higher yield, because he's, getting higher yield because he's paying out, because the market conditions are running high and hot. And so they're getting higher yields. So maybe that would happen then, but then they would fluctuate back into our network in the bear markets, blah, blah. So it's like, that's kind of the argument, or the kind of the thinking that I have, is of like, I kind of like it because I like the idea in general of moving the swappers from paying for the reserve in some sense, because we want them to be cheap. We want them to be plentiful. We want as many swappers as possible. That's probably the first priority in some ways, more than anything else. And we try to get LPs because we want swappers. We don't get LPs because we want LPs. We want to get LPs because we want swappers, right? Like it's really what they're here to do, is to provide capital so we can acquire more swaps. So that's the argument. And I don't know how I feel about, the kind of volatility thing of the income. Like I kind of like it and I kind of hate it at the same time. So I'm kind of mixed on it myself.
Yeah, it's a big departure from where we're at currently, and I definitely think more like I think we just need some data, especially like on things like block rewards. Like, what is do you know anything about the effect of block rewards and the price of Rune? Like, I'm sure there has to, like, by injecting Rune into the pools, that effectively lowers the price of Rune over time, right? Like, that's what I think about it, at least.
I mean, so yes. So the current supply of Rune is, I think like 320 million or some quantity. I don't remember, but like something like that. And the rest of it's basically in the reserve for the most part. And as you emit block rewards, you are, diluting the price, right? And that's just the fact of the mathematics of it, right? Like you can't deny that. How much of an actual literal effect it has on the price is a much more debatable concept. Because when you pump Rune to the pools as block rewards, you are effectively creating sell pressure, because now assuming that before that block, the ratio between the asset and Rune in the pool was perfect, and that was the market price. The pool price and the market price are equal in this particular second. And we add a bunch of more Rune into the pool, whatever that quantity is. And like it's not a lot. Like it's like a few Rune a day, a few Rune a block, or whatever the hell. It's not like it's really, pushing anything, but you increase the quantity of Rune in the pool by a slight little tiny bump. And technically speaking, an arbitrage bot would arb that and then sell that rune in the market and create a small amount of sell pressure. Technically, that wouldn't happen in a single block just because the amount in the block is so small and so tiny and broken down to so many different pools that it's not possible for an arb bot to sell that, because it's just you would pay more in fees and that kind of stuff that it just wouldn't be mathematically profitable. You'd have to wait until 100 blocks or 200 blocks or some I don't know what the hell the number would be, but just some much larger number. And we've had arguments within Discord too about the effect of block rewards on the price, and you can take a look at a comparison. Look at a project like Osmosis, which has much higher block rewards. They inflate the token significantly higher than we do as a protocol. And we can look at how have we performed in the bear market in the last few months versus Osmosis. Are they underperforming us or under? And it's in price, there's a lot of things that go into price than just number of coins in circulation. So it's you really can't make a direct correlation for obvious reasons, but you can try to get some information that way. My own feeling is that it's not very significant, and it's getting less significant every day, especially as the liquidity of Rune itself, the daily trade volume of Rune, the number of millions of dollars of Rune trade per day increases, that block reward effect on the price decreases. Along with every block, it does get less than the previous block in a literal sense. So I don't think it's that significant. If we were to double the block rewards, that would be obviously different, right? And maybe we would do that as part of this, because we are now taking in all this revenue from the swap fees, and now we hypothetically we would double the block rewards, and that would have double an effect on the price on the price on the Rune asset. It's really hard to know exactly how much effect that would have. My feeling sense, and I can be completely wrong about this, and I'm happy to be wrong if someone's explained to me why I'm wrong, is that it would not be that significant in my opinion.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was any actual analysis that went into it. I guess it does make sense, though. I think it's around 30K Rune a day, and especially when that's divided amongst all of the pools, it is not especially significant when it comes to the actual depth of the pools and how much it's diluting. And
yeah,
it seems like it's kind of just dust compared to just the regular price movements that would be captured by ARBs.
So if you think about say the number is 30,000 Rune per day. I don't know what the number is off the top of my head, but I'm assuming you're correct with that. The trade volume of THORChain itself, of Rune itself, is I'm looking at CoinMarketCap right now. It says about $36 million in 24-hour trade volume. 30,000 Rune in the context of 36 million is, to me, it doesn't sound very significant, right? It has an effect for sure. I'm agreeing that it has an effect, but I just don't think it's going to cause Rune to go to zero or anything like that. That'd be absolutely ridiculous. So I really don't think it would have that significant effect on the price, but it definitely would have some effect.
Yeah, is there any data that you think that would be useful to know to determine whether ADR9 is the direction, the better direction to move in, or what kind of data do you think that we need to look at to determine whether this is the right direction to go, or to continue with the current model of paying LPs directly rather than paying the reserve and have the reserve pay LPs?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's not so much about data collection, in my opinion, at a high level. It's more about answering two questions that I think the community should think about and decide for themselves whether they think this is a good idea or a bad idea. The first question is, who should pay into the reserve to keep the reserve pumping and working and all these kind of things, right? Should it be proppers? Should it be LPs? Should it be nodes? It could be just Rune holders by just minting Rune into the reserve. That would just cause Rune holders, everybody who's holding Rune, to pay into it, right? That could be the answer. That's the first question to answer. Second question that you should think about is, do we like the idea of more consistent yield for LPs and nodes? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? And I think you can make an argument for it's good. You can make an argument for it's bad. I think both have legitimate and fair points to be made. But that's just the two questions I think at a high level. If you want to get to a high level discussion, think about those two questions and answer those two questions. That probably tells you the general direction you like.
Would it be possible to go back in time, say a year, and simulate what the what the difference would be in a position? Say we implemented this one year ago, and you look at any LP position, you know, obviously given the same price movements and given the same income, but instead distributed. Is that even like a possible calculation to make to help to like drive
Yeah,
one direction or the other?
it is, but it also depends upon like changes to the emission curve, right? It also depends upon like when you entered and when you exited. So like to think of it and another way of like the yield that the reserve earns from the swap fees in this scenario, it's paying out over a curve over like 100 years to come, right? It's like most of it's happening now, but you know there'll be a tail end of it in 100 years, 200 years, 300 years. Like it really goes like that. Like the mathematics, you know, is kind of fascinating to look at. So it's like income made now is used to pay into future LPs and future notes, right? And so so if you want to answer that question, you just asked about like, oh, if you switched this like a year ago or a year and a half ago or something like this, it depends on how you change the emission curve. If it's unchanged or it's increased or decreased, whatever direction you want to go, that will change the outcome of that. But yeah, I think it's theoretically possible to calculate that. I think like maybe Orion or one of the other data science people in the community can probably do that calculation.
Yeah, because it seems like paying to the reserve directly is almost like saying, oh, like we're putting this money in a trust where it gets distributed to you over the next 100 years. So it's like forcing someone to save basically, where instead of just giving them the earnings that they would have had, it's like saying, oh yeah, these are the earnings, but we're going to give them to you over the next 100 years, and if you leave before then you're not getting the full earnings. So like but they would also be since the block rewards would be turned up, then they would be getting paid more from those block
Right.
rewards. So yeah, it's
right. At that point, it would be more or less nuts, right? Like it would more so be, in some sense, a dead even scenario anyway.
right.
If the block rewards are increased in a relative to the decrease that you lose from the swap fees itself, then it's like it's nothing happened. Like it's actually mathematically, it's not the same technically speaking, but for all intents and purposes, nothing changed in the network at all.
Yeah, I think we'll need to stew on this one a little bit more. I don't know whether there's going to be more discussion about this, but yeah, this is definitely an interesting one.
It's
I haven't
interesting.
seen a lot of different thoughts on it.
We haven't actually had like a conversation about changing like a significant change to how like the economics of the core protocol that's been around for years. Like we haven't talked about making any changes to that in years. This is like the first time we've actually done that, at least in my recollection that I can think of.
Yeah, and it does kind of make sense to rethink some of the core economics, but it's also a lot of change where it's like, you know, things do work as is, and there could be better solutions, but is there a solution that is simple enough to arrive to that produces a better outcome? Is is the core of the question, and it's like how to determine whether it'll produce a better outcome
Right.
or not, because it's not just the reserve doesn't just pay for block rewards, like it's also doing things like underwriting lending and other things as well. So there's like a lot more
Yeah.
implications than just like the future LP rewards.
One of the things that the reserve does today that I actually had the idea the other day, and I was talking to Lena about it, but like, and I'm not saying this is going to happen, right? I'm just floating a concept, but like, is that right now the reserve pays for the gas fees to do a migration, right? We do a churn and we migrate all the funds from the old Asgards to the new Asgards. The reserve pays, you know, approximately, I think it's like around 1,000 rune, like 1 to 3,000 rune, depending upon some like gas fees and rune's price and whatever. But like, pays a bunch of rune every 3 days. Gets kind of bled from the reserve into this kind of idea of paying for gas fees, and so I kind of floated the idea that like maybe the reserve is actually not the actual correct thing that should be paying for that, because it's really the validators who are in charge and take on the cost of operating the network itself. Like they spin up AWS servers and they run Bitcoin daemons and all this kind of stuff and run validators and sign TSS signatures. So like the actual operation of the network itself is actually on validators to do so and pay for the cost of operating the network itself. And so maybe the fees the gas fees we're paying to do a churn should be paid by validators instead of the reserve. So take it out of the bond module instead of the reserve module. And that would cut into the fees of the income of a validator. But like again, like validators are already earning like 14% APY. They have very little down risk for them, other than some slashes from their own mistakes for the most part. And there's not much of a like risk to them. And like if you were to charge them an extra $1,000 per churn, whatever, 1,000 rune, not $1,000, but like if you were to do that, like it would barely even register in their APY, so it would be quite insignificant. Like, because they make I think thousands of rune per churn or something. Well, the number is, and so it would register as like 100 rune each, which is like fuck all, right? So, but it makes more. I can argue from a design perspective that like it should be on the validators to pay for the cost of the operation of the network itself, which includes churning itself and moving funds from one vault to another. And if the validators want to like reduce their expense in that percent, they can just like, oh, we're going to churn every 3 days, we're going to churn every 6 days instead of every 3 days or something like this, and have less churning. They can do that too. But that would reduce one of the things we use the reserve for, and one of the costs of what we take out of the reserve, which would probably be a good thing.
At that point, isn't it just the reserve paying it? Because the reserve pays block rewards to the nodes, and then using that isn't it just having the reserve pay it just with extra steps? Like the reserve is still paying it, but it's coming out of the share that is paid to nodes.
Yeah. Then in the end, like it's correct to say that the reserve is used for the POL, and the reserve is used for like backing. The POL backs the synths and blah blah blah. But it backs the synths via the POL, and it backs lending in some sense. But honestly, it's not likely that we would actually spend that much rune. Well, maybe it would. I shouldn't say that. Like, it's not likely that we would actually use rune in the reserve for lending. It's definitely possible, and it may actually happen. But the statistical odds of that, in my opinion, are quite small, considering how the cap works in lending. It's definitely possible. We just have to see the price of rune to go 3x lower than Bitcoin's price or whatever it is. Which the only time we've ever seen that, we've seen that twice in history, and that was when THORChain got exploited multiple times and paused and all these things. And then also it went from bull market to bear market. But you'd have to see that happen, and you'd have to see 100% of all loans to be closed, which you almost never see that. You didn't even see that on Terra when there was a complete collapse happening there too. So it's just like the odds of that happening, I think, would be extremely small. But maybe I'll be eating my words into the future. But like I just can't see that being a reasonable thing to occur. The POL is a much more realistic scenario. POL could be use a rune in a more viable way, and maybe it will one day. But in the current moment, we don't even need the POL at all. Like it's not even enough demand on synths to cause a POL to be even triggered. So, maybe we won't even be using it for years.
Yeah, and speaking of that, last thing I want to go into, because we've already been on for 2 hours, but the POL seems really close to being activated. I checked this morning, and we're at 48% synth utilization. POL, its target utilization is 45%, and it's supposed to tick on at 50, and then marches down to 45. So it's like we're fairly close to being there. Like I could easily see it happen within the next 1 to 2 weeks that POL gets turned on finally, now that we've almost reached the threshold of being at 50% synth utilization. So
Yeah,
it seems like we're in the final stages of that, and then we can finally get the POL era started.
started going. Yeah, it's funny because say we start using the POL, in a couple weeks, like you were saying, maybe that's true. And then hypothetically, we say we launch lending, right? And let's say we launch lending next month. I don't know. I'm not saying that's going to happen next month or not, but I'm just saying hypothetically. And then, Rune, we buy and burn 5 million Rune out of the pools and buy it out of the Binance order books and so forth and so on, which, should cause the Rune price to go up, which causes the POL to maybe leaving, the pools. And so it might get in, dip a toe, and then like a few weeks later, like get the fuck out.
Yep. Yeah, true. I mean, yeah, anything can happen with PO. It's all just based on the price movements of Rune and
Right.
whatever asset it's paired with. So it's like
You never know.
if all of a sudden Rune just goes way up tomorrow, then it's like we could never see POL if for some reason this
It's
is like
possible.
the absolute lowest. You know what I mean? So
If we were to start a bull run tomorrow, which I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if we were, then altcoins just in general outperform Bitcoin, like just almost in all cases. Not in all cases, obviously, but like just generally speaking, that's just always true, just because of the lower market caps. And so, like Rune's price would just naturally outperform Bitcoin, and therefore the POL would be less and less needed, unless Savers becomes like a really in-demand product, and like everybody awakens to the power of Savers, and Bitcoin maxis get the thumb out their asses, and they start depositing a bunch of Bitcoin. But like, yeah, the Rune price could just. But then again, the opposite could happen where. Some people are very bearish on the macro sense of things, and the stock market's going to crash this year. Blah blah blah. People are saying shit, and who knows if that's fucking true or not? Nobody fucking knows. But like if that were, then like the people would jump in more, right? Because the Rune price is not at wherever it is now, like $1 something, and maybe it's $1 even. Who knows? Like that could happen, over the next 6 months. Couldn't tell you.
Actually, last thing. I think you said you might be away, Chad. May 17th. There's going to be a side event at Bitcoin Miami, the Bitcoin Builders Conference. It's mostly dedicated to layer twos, and I guess like Stacks is going to be there. Some of those wallets. I asked them about speaking slots, and they were totally down to have one of us at the stage on May 17th doing a spot there. So if you're available, it'd be great to get you down. But I think you might be busy, so we'll see if any of the Nine Realms guys, or maybe I'll go out. Or I think it'd be a good idea to just have some FaceTime down there, though. And it's always good to meet builders in person for integration stuff. But
I mean, it sounds like a lot of fun, and I'd be down to do it. But my wife and I and my kid are going to Japan probably next week, so we'll probably be gone for an extended period of time. I know I'll be still alive and working and such, but I'll be in Japanese time period, time zone.
Cool. Well, have fun in Japan, Chad. And then, so I guess, definitely let us know, because then that means we may or may not do these spaces. We'll figure that out.
Yep. Appreciate it.
Cool.
Oh, and isn't there like a THORChain event at the consensus later this month?
Right? Yeah, the Fathom X guys were telling me that they wanted to run the expo again, but is consensus like this week? I think it's like very soon.
I think it's like the 26th or 27th, 28th. I think that's what it is.
Yeah, I think they were talking about it, but I haven't really seen any noise since. They were trying to get some speakers and such, but I think there's just a lot of challenges to go into it. And they were asking me about this like 2-3 weeks ago, so it was like very recent. So it wasn't like a huge notice. Nor do I think a lot of people from the community would be out there. So I'm not sure if the cost is worth it. They seem like they wanted to do it though. And they're also local to the area, so.
They asked me if I'd be willing to speak whenever, and I kind of. At that time, I didn't know if I was going to be in the country or not, and now I know that I'm not, so I won't be able to go personally. But
yeah, I haven't heard anything recently, so I'm assuming it's not happening. I think it'd be a good idea for the future. I think it's a better idea to make it like a full cross-chain thing rather than just like a THORChain meetup, because our community is very small, and we're also very integrated into other like ecosystem. So I don't think it
That's
really makes
true.
sense to have like just a THORChain conference, but it would be a great idea to have like a cross chain, like a real cross chain event where it's like, we do it with like, I don't know, all the different cross chain protocols. We go over there with layer zero and, and like, I don't know, some IBC people. I'm not even sure, but I think that's a much better idea than
I
doing
actually
like
like that.
a THORChain conference.
I can get down with that.
Yeah, someone's just got to organize it, and that's the issue because I don't think I could do that. Nor do I have any interest in doing that.
I don't have the time. I'm spending too much time on THORChain and Archeo and other things that I'm trying to work on and build. I'm trying to start a new podcast too, which I've been putting that off for fucking weeks. And Jesus Christ, just too much shit going on.
And then you're going to Japan.
And I go to Japan. Yeah. Gotta keep the wife happy.
I guess. Yeah. That'll be fun. Yeah, man, I'm jealous. All right, well, let's wrap it then. Great seeing you guys again, and yeah, maybe next week, or if you're away, then maybe not. So yeah, thanks everybody.
Hey guys.
Yeah, sounds good. Enjoy Japan.
Thanks, man.
See you guys.
Peace.
Later.